Hi, welcome everyone. Welcome to the SoDA series live. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Tom Beck, and I'll be the host today. I'm typically joined by my good friend Kristen Bell, but she is out at an offsite meeting today, so we'll miss her, but we'll try to trudge along without her. Again, thanks for joining the SoDA series live. This is a monthly live stream broadcast between SoDA and the Adobe XD team. And each month we chat with a senior designer, a senior agency leader about trends kind of shaping the digital design industry, as well as culture, company, career growth, emerging technology, consumer trends, and a whole host of other topics. So we're thrilled that you've joined us. And again, this is a collaboration with the Adobe XD team in SoDA. I'm Tom Beck, and I'm Executive Director of SoDA. For those of you who don't know us, we are a global member-based organization for the founders and owners of digital design studios. Owners' leadership teams create the most successful companies and cultures that they can through peer collaboration, thought leadership, resource sharing, and a whole host of other mechanisms. So we're going to have a great conversation today. And first, I would like to introduce Talon Wadsworth. Talon is the principal designer at Adobe and spends a lot of his time thinking about the Adobe XD product and how to take it forward and make it the most powerful tool for the challenges we're facing as designers today. So Talon, thanks for joining us. It's great to see you.
Great to see you, Tom. Always happy to be here. Get to talk a little shop on on a Thursday morning. What better way to kick things off for me?
Yeah, exactly. And then I'd like to introduce our guest for today, Sherine Kazim from Siberia. Sherine is the head of design at Siberia, and she's had an incredible career with great names like Electronic Arts, AKQA, Huge, Wonderman Thompson, and now she's the head of design at Siberia. Siberia is a digital product and design studio with studios in New York, London, and San Francisco, and they do incredible work for brands like Nike and Airbnb and Google. And recently they worked with Reese Witherspoon on her very cool app for her book club. So we're thrilled to have Sherine here today to chat with us. Thank you, Sherine.
Thank you.
So before we get started and I kick it off to Talon, just a couple logistics. I'm going to drop off camera and I will be in the LinkedIn comments and conversation. So if you have any questions along the way or comments, please post them in LinkedIn and I will get them surfaced to Talon and Sherine throughout the conversation. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Talon and have a great conversation today, guys.
Thanks, Tom. Hey, Sherine, how are you?
Hey, friend, I'm good. How are you?
Doing all right. Good morning. Well, really excited to be talking with you today. Like I was saying to Tom before he came on, like there's no better way for me to spend my mornings, whether it's a Thursday or whatever day of the week it is, talking design. It's why I think I've hung around Adobe as long as I have now. It's the best gig really to be able to do that. So I'm really excited to be chatting with you. Let's kind of like just kick things off here. Just give us like a little background. Right. Give us a little, let's set the stage for all those people who are joining us today, kind of your journey in, becoming the head of design at Siberia and, how you got, let's start with how did you get started in design? What was really your roots into what this, and sometimes amorphous kind of, industry that we call design?
Yeah, I mean, there's no straight linear path for me, nor do I think there ever should be a linear path for anyone. I actually got my start designing flyers at nightclubs when I was in college. And it's a good story behind that one. Let's not pretend that I actually knew what I was doing back then. I didn't. My friend, Tim Stevenson, needed some help doing some construction work at a nightclub. I offered to help because I needed some money. And so the manager came up to us and said, "Hey, I really need a flyer. Can one of you guys do it?" And Tim looked at him straight-faced and said, "Sherine can do it."
She's got it.
And then he looked at me and he said, "Are you sure you can do it?" And before I could say anything, Tim goes, "She sure can." And I was like, okay. So then he walks away and I look at Tim and I'm like, "I don't know what I'm doing." And he goes, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out." And little did I know that those 3 words would end up becoming my mantra for my entire career.
Oh my gosh. That's amazing. So I gotta ask though, what did you use to create the poster? Were you like cutting and pasting mock-ups on like like zine style and like the scanner beds of the Xerox, or were you using like Photoshop? What did you end up making the flyers in?
So it kind of depended what we were doing. So in some cases, I used an old program called Quark that some people might be familiar with. There was Photoshop. I think it was 2.0. This is pre-layers came into play as well. There was a lot of love with the Xerox happening there as well. Anything we could do to get that feel out so that people could get a handle on what we were trying to promote that night.
It's so interesting how I remember this feeling when I was younger and before I even knew what I wanted to do, that there were these creative pursuits, we'll say, and you really didn't know that you could make money, make a living like doing that. You were just doing it because you were asked to do it, or you were driven to do it. I remember making zines and everything like when I was in like high school and stuff like that, just so putting all the stuff on the scanner bed and just like running off a bunch of copies, and like a lot of people start in design not really with a plan that this is gonna be a career. This is gonna be something I'm gonna be able to make money on and make a living on, for the rest of my days as a working person here.
Yeah, that's really true. So my undergrad was in advertising of all things. And I didn't get to advertising until like 20 years later. It just goes to show you're just not really sure where that path is going to take you. When I was at the nightclubs, I mean, as much as I loved it, girls got to eat, man. And like I couldn't find a lot of work on the East Coast. And my brother called me and said, listen, there's this magical place called California. Come on out. And I bet you'll find work. And sure as hell, like that first interview, I got work. And I found a mentor. So it was a wonderful like twofer for me. But what was interesting about that was that the type of work I ended up getting was nowhere near what I thought it was going to be. Working with a lot of like labs and groups like Xerox PARC and Philips Labs. And places where you create products that really don't see the light of day for years and years, which seems exciting, but when you're young and trying to build a portfolio, not awesome. So it was tricky.
Well, now that we've maybe the statute of limitations or something things have been declassified. Like, what kind of work were you doing when you moved out to California? Like, what was designed for you as you were moving out there and taking on these new roles and these new groups and working with these people?
So as I was growing up, I mean, the platforms are growing up too, right? So the very first like interactive piece I ever did was for television. And it was for Philips Labs. And this was a gazillion years ago. So Philips, don't come after me. But I remember sitting in that room and this woman walks in with this huge headset and she had like this sort of monitor thing in front of her. And that was like wearable computing at that point, like quite literally. And it was it was giving her such a headache. And as we were trying to figure out what this thing would look like, they put down a remote in front of me. Now, if you think about physical devices and the buttons we have now, like reducing the amount of inputs that you have there is actually quite easy because they're so sophisticated and the software and the hardware work really well together. Back then, they just put down a piece of plastic with one button in front of me and said, what do you think? And I was like, I have no idea what to do. But we still had to have all of the bells and whistles that you typically see on your screens now. So that was the first one I did. We had a lot of limitations there, even in terms of color. Because portable TVs aren't nearly as great as what you see now for resolution. So pretty challenging. I still have that project somewhere.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. So how are you problem solving? How are you thinking through creating interactions for these things that really had never been seen before? I mean, you probably had familiarity with different aspects of it, but bringing it all together, like, talk about a little bit about the problem solving that you did in some of those early projects there.
I mean, this I think goes back to that whole figuring it out thing and like that comfort with bumping into walls. I think often we can leverage learnings that we have in other places. What makes sense. What you don't know is how people are going to use a device to control something else necessarily, unless you're just of changing the channel in a singular way. So to start understanding a lot of how all that works, the tech team plays a huge role. They're basically our creative partners from day one. And so you're sitting with industrial designers as well to sort of try and lay everything out and figure out exactly what's possible, because remember, it's a future vision thing for them too. So they're figuring it out in real time. So we're all sort of working together like, well, we think if we move it this way, that this button should move in a circle. It's like, do users do that? Don't know, not allowed to test. There's some there though.
We'll design it and we'll test it ourselves.
Exactly.
I mean, that's so fascinating where you sort of, and I think sometimes, you know, in the majority of the UX, experience design industry, like you're doing pretty much your design interactions for flat screens for these platforms, whether they be web or native, and a lot of the patterns have already sort of been laid down, right? So there's a lot of information you can sort of pull from. But I think it's always sort of fascinating, like problem solving alongside of your collaborators to solve an interaction problem, which again, like when you get right down to it, could be, yes, about the platform, but about the capabilities of that platform, about the capabilities of the hardware that you're working with. That's just a fascinating problem space. What was anything you can share from your Xerox Park, experience, like, working on anything there?
Yeah, it was a tablet, and it was a tablet like a gazillion years ago. And so working on something like that was just so strange. Like, because again, trying to think about, is it a stylus? Because I think they were trying to push, not they, but the industry itself was trying to push the notion of a stylus. Using a tablet and, just trying to look at your finger and thinking there's no way anyone's going to use a finger to like move around this thing. Yeah, it was a tablet.
Wow, that's really exciting work. Again, I've had the experience, not often, but yeah, like in creating creative tools, Adobe creating for all these different devices, thinking through a problem set, trying to help someone for themselves to create great work out of the product. Like that's a really complex problem set, and it brings in all these different factors and psychology, like the ways in which we think and work and process things as humans. It really becomes like really fascinating when you dig right down to it, how we perceive things, and then how we kind of use what we see in front of us to problem solve ourselves, to cobble together workflows that work for us, right? So that's a really fascinating sort of space to be working in. That's cool.
And I'm actually really grateful for those early days, because I think it was the first time that I understood what it was like to be in a room with people that did physical research, devices, and then work with engineers that worked across both digital and physical devices. And then everybody had an equal seat at the table. And I think that level of collaboration across those disciplines is something that I still expect today, and I'm constantly looking for.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I think, again, working in the studio setting, doing more traditional service-based design, it was great. It was exciting. And I did get to work with some fabricators because we were doing environmental work. But when I got to Adobe and we had these amazingly talented engineers, some of the smartest people I'll ever meet in my life. And the things that we were able to do together and the way we were able to sort of push each other and kind of have that collaborative conversation, that creative conversation, that really is a thing where, 1 + 1 = 3, right? Like you really are creating something that pushes you beyond each of your individual capability sets. And ideally ending up with something that is, I don't want to say innovative, that feels like maybe a little too high-minded, but interesting and exciting and pushes kind of everything forward, the whole conversation around design, around interaction design forward.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of like like your journey there in the early formative days. How did you end up at Siberia as the head of design? What sort of led you down that path from doing more, that work, that early work out there in California to kind of where you are today? How did you end up as the head of design at Siberia?
Siberia actually reminded me a lot of those early days. Yeah. I think that right before Siberia, I was at a gigantic ad agency they very much wanted to build a product and service team inside of that. And so that was my remit, was to go in there and try and work that out, which was great. But when Siberia called and I'd never heard of them, by the way. But when I met with Chris Mealy, our MD, and he started walking me through the work, I was floored at what I was seeing and could not believe that they somehow figured out to find this balance between consumer-facing products and future vision products, and really create some spectacular results with very small, tight teams that are fully integrated with the clients. Like, that got really, really exciting for me, that they were at the forefront of so many things. And so, like, I think he probably doesn't know this. So Chris, if you're listening, you're going to know it now. He had me pretty much from the first slide that I was going to join. So I was pretty excited about what I saw there.
Oh, exciting. So so tell me a little bit, describe that a little bit more, like the work that's being done at Siberia, both, again, more service product oriented sort of design, but also more future facing. Tell us a little bit more about that, and maybe how that work is split up. Is it everybody kind of working a little bit of time over here, a little bit of time over there, these two separate divisions? Like, how are you organized to go and tackle that work, and what is that work?
So if you think about, like, sort of the pillars around products, they tend to be product management, product design, product strategy, product technology, right? So, like, these four beautiful pillars. I think Siberia takes those four pillars and make sure that they are standing up every type of product that we have. What the roles of those people are on that particular project, whether they're hands-on leadership or simply consulting, everybody has a seat at the table, right? And everybody needs to be there because everybody has something to bring. And I think that's part of that beauty of the different perspectives coming together in an effort to create the best possible solution for our clients. So again, whether that's a future vision thing, and we're trying to think ahead to, like, okay, what is this thing going to look like in 5 years from now? Or what's it going to look like 5 minutes from now for whatever incremental change needs to take place? The people at the table are pretty much the same. The roles just might shift a little bit.
And so that work really stretches across kind of more standard sort of service product design, as well as maybe more conceptual future-facing products. Hardware involved in that? Does Siberia get delve into that space as well, like working with hardware, newer concepts on that side as well?
Yeah, Siberia's history, I think, started in more physical computing. And so they did a really cool physical sensor job for, I think it was Nest, if I remember correctly. And that was the first one. So their roots are very much like in that world. And then slowly, how the work shifts and where the needs shift, we begin to shift as well. So we're playing more in that service and product area. Now ask me, and I will tell you a secret that I very much want to do some of the other stuff. I don't think anybody's going to fight us on that one. I think that's something that we very much want to get back into as well. So I think, especially now, the way things are becoming so much more integrated. And when I say that, I mean, even on the client side and the way in which they organize, they're becoming more integrated, that it's only a matter of time, I think, before we see some more things like that coming our way, every agency's way, which is kind of...
That's been a common thread, I think, through all the conversations that Tom and Kristen and myself have had with the SoDA agencies over the last year, is that there was work that they were having to beg the clients to let us do this for you. And now that was a couple of years ago, and now that's work they're being asked to do, and that's why they're seeing this kind of growth, right? Where even though over the pandemic we're seeing this big shift away from maybe where they're putting all their chips in previously, more traditional, print-based marketing and ads and everything like that. Like, that's all really shifted through the pandemic. Does that ring true to you? Like that, has that tracked on your side as well? Like, just seeing clients wanting more digital work, more integrated work, right? Really up-leveling the user experience for all the different touch points for their brand or for their product.
Yeah, 1,000%. I might say that, like, what I'm seeing and what I saw, and I've only been in Siberia 3 months, so I'm going to talk about it a little bit more broadly because this pandemic.
Yeah.
More than 3 months. So, like, when we look at what's been happening over the last 2 years or so, the amount of change that we're seeing is actually fairly exciting. It's terrifying too. But, like, I'm just gonna put a work lens on this. When when we look at what's currently happening and we see the changes that are beginning to take place, the thing that gets me most excited is that the clients want to change. So it almost doesn't even matter that like they want an integrated experience or they want more digital in the physical space or anything like that. Just by the mere fact that they want to have the conversations around this stuff is an opportunity for us to go in and try and help them out, because I think for them, they don't know what they don't know. Nobody does. And this is all about that figure it out and bumping into walls thing that I love so much. Like, this is what we really should be taking advantage of right now, because if there was a time to make a mistake, this is it. This is the time to bump into walls.
Yeah, for sure. Where again, like I think we've all had this experience ourselves where our touch points now, our interaction points with these companies, with these services and brands is really, it's all over. It's all, all digital, and it across many different surfaces. And I think to me, that's the thing that has been a constant thread internally for our teams as well, is thinking about, well, how do we create products that help designers conceptualize and tell stories, not just on one screen at different sizes, but multiple screens connected through a variety of services, right, at a variety of different sizes, and keep that consistent and have the user their story be present, through all of those touch points, right? So from an end-to-end perspective.
Exactly. I mean, here's the question I would ask anybody, any designer, any client: what's the downside of like not meeting the user where they are?
Yeah.
Why not just make your life easy?
Seriously. Yeah. Well, I want to kind of go back for a minute, because there's just something that you about your how you got into design in making those nightclub posters, and even some of those stories that you're telling about your early days working on the sort of out there products with Xerox and the others. Is I think one thing that I know that I've noticed is that we become, as designers, maybe a little more removed from the end-to-end process of seeing a project from from the start, from sort of concept phase all the way through to production, and really having our hands on it, right? Like throughout that whole process. I mean, that's one of the things I love about printing, whether it's, using a Xerox machine or a risograph or a letterpress, is that, I really get to, as a designer, get to follow that thing all the way through to that final artifact that I'm sort of holding in my hand. And, so that experience that you had in those early days just reminded me of that. And I want to say, like, what role does that play for you? Like, what importance do you place on it? And how do you bring that same vibe, into an environment where, again, it's not just you as the single solo designer, it's you plus a product manager, plus an engineer, plus a hardware person, right? Like, the impact can sometimes feel a little more diffuse, right? So how do you carry through that vibe of being able to put your hands on and feel that satisfaction of seeing that project through from end to end?
I mean, I feel like you kind of have to want to do it. And this is where things get really tricky, particularly for designers as you move up the ladder, like the demands that sort of are placed on us to understand the business side of things. And God help you if you're a good communicator, because all of a sudden you're a strategist too. And so what will end up happening is you begin to see the designer shift and shift and shift and morph and morph and morph, which is cool if they want to, but can be really difficult if you're in love with the craft and you start to get away from that craft. And we know how quickly tools change. Like what was Figma 5 years ago? Like, exactly. And so when we watch all these things continue to evolve and change, it's difficult for us to maintain credibility with our teams, like to maintain credibility with the design community, to say, hey, we're actually still part of this. We're not just some sellout that's like, working on the business side of things. I think what comes with that is making some really conscious choices about what you want to do. I made a conscious choice to step away from a job at a very large agency to get closer to the product again, right? To get closer to the team again and to get more collaboration. Because what I found was that a lot of those larger places is that there's a lot of offshore. There's a lot of things moving away, and it's not that those things are bad. That's what can make a business healthy, but does it make design healthy? And I think that's what it's really coming down to for someone like me. I can't speak for all designers, definitely, certainly not. But I do think that that's really important, because I think being able to own that thing from start to finish and working with those teams, at the same time throughout that particular process lends itself to not just ownership, but like it does help create a stronger culture, because you do feel like you're in it together. And there is something to be said for that.
Yeah. I remember that resonates with me when I first sort of joined the team here at Adobe, and it was very service oriented in a way. Like, there was a centralized team, but design was really seen as similar to, I think sometimes how engineering gets kind of pigeonholed as well, is just like, okay, once the real idea work has been done, then you hand it over to the designer to then, to make the pixels perfect, in a way. And, that was kind of the scene when I first joined. And, part of the project that we've been on, and the bigger meta story that we've been on is how do we get the designers more tapped into the process from an end-to-end perspective, have that seat at the table from the very beginning and really bring to bear like all the value that they could offer, right? And you mentioned a word in there, the communication, the skills that designers have, and that they can employ to be able to effectively communicate, to a set of collaborators, to keep that thread of the user sort of, and have that torch burning, all the way through that process and be that voice. Like that's been an ongoing project, and I think that the trend line has been that more designers are being included earlier in the conversation, and I think that really sets up for creating great products and great services out there.
I think so too. And it's about time. I mean, like the old days of like, let's just give it to design and they'll sort it out. Like, I got a better idea. Let us move to the front and let's help like figure out, like, are we problem seekers or problem solvers at this point? And I think that that's really the biggest thing that I'm seeing, is that for so long we've been treated as problem solvers, but I think that as we become more savvy and become more strategic in our approach of like what we're trying to answer, like ultimately what are we trying to deliver, we actually end up being problem seekers to find out, like, are we actually asking the right questions? And I think that is a part of design. Like other larger agencies can call this whatever they want, but at the end of the day, it's still part of the design process.
Yeah, 100%. There is, that's one of, this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm just going to kind of run this at you. One of the things that I've been sort of thinking about and sort of trying to build a bit larger hypothesis around is that the shift in tools that we're seeing really is all about us finally taking into account how much work is involved in the design process outside of just like pushing the pixels, right? So tools that really help us to have more efficient means of communication, establishing sort of collaborative workflows, connecting a project, to a group of, again, maybe even non-designers, and helping them tell that story over time. That really, that's been the shift that we've been on. And I don't know if that resonates with you, just in terms of like, again, you've seen this evolution of tools going from, using Quark and Photoshop to do like really specific things. And now again, the designer was always doing more than just that. Like the designer was, writing the proposal brief, writing, the sort of overall sort of strategy, maybe even doing some copywriting, putting together the presentation, sharing it out to the clients, writing the emails. Like there was always all this work that was happening outside and around the tool that was almost as important to the design process, as pushing the pixels was.
Yeah, I think we're seeing it change exponentially too, though. I think now that we're all pretty much remote or mostly remote, we'll see what happens with the hybrid models for some folks that may be subjected to hybrid models in the future. I think that I think those tools, they do spread well beyond design, and I think that that's important though, because otherwise I don't know how we would collaborate with product managers if we were only sticking to whatever design tool.
Yeah. So we've sort of moved away from our silos, into this much broader conversation, right? And we've been able to communicate at a much higher level in a much more efficient way, a much more effective way, right? At the end of the day, like that's our goal, is like to communicate, like this is the design intent, and communicate to a set of collaborators so we can go and execute on it, as a team.
Yeah, something happened with this word silo. I don't know what happened. Somehow I got tied to the word ownership. Silos became a thing. It is the worst thing you can do to products and services out there is to stick to your silos. And if I have any clients out there, I'm telling you, smash your silos. Like enough.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of fear, right? There's a lot of fear in letting people in to seeing like how the sausage is made, right? To see like, am I worried about job security, that some other person's going to come here and like sort of take my job as a designer because they can use, a Canva or, what have you. Well, that's always going to be the case. It's always been the anxiety that's been, that I think designers have always faced and creatives have always faced, which is like, yeah, what is it, the special sauce that we bring to the table? Like, we are more than our tools, right? We are more than any sort of individual output. Like the process, the sort of the communication, like those are the things that we bring to the table that, again, you can't really quantify sometimes because it's attached to a specific feature and within a specific tool. But it's really like how you use those tools to do the work of design, which is really important.
That's right. And I also don't want design ever to be exclusive. Like that's just, that is not my jam. Like I'm not going to tell somebody that they can't do something. If they have an idea and they want to sketch it in whatever form they want to do it. Because if somebody blocked me in the early days, I wouldn't have done a flyer. I wouldn't have designed a nightclub. I wouldn't have, designed an interface for Philips Labs and on and on. Like, it's just, if design is going to take a more innovation forward approach to doing things, you're not helping anybody by holding on to things really tightly. Like at some point, you just got to let go and let people in.
Yeah, 100%. I still remember those, like, it was like drilled into my head at school. Every day we would come in and I had those professors who were like, all right, the work's got to go up on the wall. Like wherever you're at, doesn't matter where you're at, put it up on the wall and we're going to talk about it. And we're going to and you got to show something every time, and just like forcing that message in, like you've got to let people in. Like you're only going to get better if you allow people into the process and give you, critique and feedback. And sometimes it's going to be great. And sometimes it's going to be maybe a little harsh, but like, that's going to help you be better at the end of the day. That's going to help you get to that next level, whatever it is, whether you agree or not with whatever these people say, it's all a part of the process.
That's right. Like an idea isn't an idea until you externalize it. So like once it's up there, like don't worry about it. No one's coming after you personally. Like it's just, we just think your kerning's all fix it. So
there was always that one. That was always the comment. The kerning. The kerning on this one could be a little weird.
It's so sensitive.
Thanks. Very helpful. Thank you. Well, let's shift to your role here at Siberia here a little bit, because I think this kind of does trend on to some of the themes and ideas that we've already been talking about. How do you go about establishing strong culture, at a design, within a design team, then within a, maybe a more, even like a more diversified sort of team that has a lot of different roles and responsibilities. Tell us a little bit about that. Like, what are some of those things that you do to build culture, to foster that design culture within your team and organizations?
I mean, the one thing I feel really strongly about is really getting to know your team. And I know that sounds a little fluffy, but hang tight for a second and let me like work my way through this one. So I think whenever I've stepped into different companies, the role in which you play is so different. Sometimes you're inheriting a team with very, very, very strong cultures, which I have certainly been subjected to, and that's always really scary. And then sometimes you get to build it from scratch. And then sometimes let's say the group or the studio has a really strong culture, but perhaps the design team isn't fully formed yet. Regardless of what model we're talking about or what situation we're talking about, the way in which we approach designers and how we talk to them is key. And so I personally always try to have a lot of real talk and a lot of transparency right off the bat. And I do that because I'm learning too, right? I just joined the company. It is my way of externalizing my thinking and as I process. The person that I'm talking to, regardless of the level that they're at, has more experience than I do at the particular company. They've been there more than a day longer than me, so they must know something. But when you do that, it ends up opening yourself up to having a lot of real talk and a lot of true collaborative discussions about like where you want to take a particular team. I think making an assumption around someone's title that is all they do is the biggest mistake we can make as design leaders, and it's something that I just won't do. If I had it my way, we would not have any title other than designer.
Yeah,
that would be it.
Yeah, so I've had similar thoughts on that, but maybe it's a discussion for another time. But I agree with you that what we have is we have the responsibilities or the roles that we're playing on any given project, but that doesn't set us apart in any way, depending on what that, whatever titles can sometimes do that, can kind of remove people from like that openness, creating that that culture of trust, right? That I know that on some teams that I've had, and I've seen it both from the the bad side and the good side, where on those teams where we've established those relationships, we have that trust. It's just amazing, like how I mean, just how much everybody really starts to perform at their highest level. You have those open lines of communication. You have that trust where you can be a little vulnerable and put your ideas out there, and you're not going to get shot down. That you're going to be taken seriously, and that your impact is going to be felt. I think people are always just looking for that, and I think that does help in establishing that culture. Are there any as we've all been working remotely, have there been unique challenges that you faced in continuing to bring the team together, to continue to grow, as a team, as an organization, and some ways that you've kind of tried to overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the hardest things is as designers, we feel. And so when you're with people, I mean, whatever, man, I'm from California, you're going to feel people's energy. And when you go into this world where everything's fully remote, it forces you to have different kinds of conversations in different ways. And it forces you to ask questions that almost seem shocking, because you can't just hear the person kind of put your hand on their arm and be like, you okay? Because when you say it this way, like when I look into the camera and say, you okay? It's and everyone gets a little nervous really, really quickly there. So we did have to adjust, I think, quite a bit. I think the other thing that was laid bare with the pandemic is the amount of management that we had to do, particularly with the folks that were reporting to us. And I don't just mean in terms of hey, how's your design work? And how's your workload? I mean, how are you? And what does that begin to feel like? And I think that became very, very difficult in terms of how we should be treating people. And I think that it brought a level of kindness and softness into the mix. And I was really happy to see that. So I hope that's something we hold on to.
I hope so too. I think that there is a tendency, especially as we've been working remotely, right? We can't pick up on those cues that we normally would, and everyone can start to feel very isolated. But instead, the realization is we're all feeling these same things, maybe to different degrees, but we're all experiencing this together and having that awareness. Yeah, for sure. Sure. Are there any activities that you like to do with your team, and just in terms of making the focus not about the work, but about that larger project of building that design practice? Or any things that you've tried out over the years, the things that you really enjoy that you go back to and say, this is a time for us to come together as a team to really focus more on in our trajectory as a design organization holistically, outside of all of the client work that we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that happens in asynchronous ways. I think what used to be hey, let's have a design team meeting, sometimes become hey, let's just get together and have a breakfast together or a lunch together, but there's no work that we're going to present. But it can also be something hey, let's just hang out and chat. So I have a design director on my team named Aaron, and he and I spend a lot of time chatting about everything. So not just work, but it's our way of sort of wrapping our head around what's going on in the world, how is that affecting us, how should we be looking at things differently in an effort to create better things, whatever that is, whether that's work related or not. And I really appreciate those conversations, because I think that it takes you away from hierarchies, it takes you away from disciplines, and actually turns you into being more human, which is really what we should be doing now anyway.
Yeah 100%. And I think those conversations do have a way, even if they're not about the project itself or the work itself, that those conversations that we have, whether it's about, art or music or whatever we're into, that we're having around the work,
exactly,
those all have a way to come back and influence the work that we're doing. And you mentioned something earlier as well about that, about how, right, it's you're sort of taking in all these things from the world in all these different ways, and they're having an impact on the work that you're doing. It's maybe hard to see exactly, but it's there. It's informing that curiosity, something that really helps to drive that creative process for all of us.
Yeah, and I think that's actually what ultimately makes us more well-rounded designers, right? So when we think about being able to attract some of that or go after some of those other experiences in an effort to make ourselves better in some way, whatever that means, ultimately affects who we are as designers. I mean, imagine if you're a UX designer and you only paid attention to UX things. Not great, super boring. I bet the work's much better if you start looking around at other things. And I think the reason why I want to encourage more and more of that behavior is similar to smashing silos, which really are just fancy vertical specialties. Like, I would like to smash all that. I would like us to sort of move more horizontally. I would like us to treat things in a more general way.
That kind of starts to bleed into my next question, which really is around this debate around design careers and the trajectory of designer over time. Like, what is your take on, and I think you're starting to sort of form that here, but specialization versus more generalists, right? So designers who are creating maybe more technical expertise and needing to sort of to grow that, to foster that side, versus, having a more generalist approach to the work. And how do you see that, and how do you encourage, again, whatever take on that you do, how do you encourage that internally with your teams?
So it's always hard, right? Because I think, the disservice that agencies made years ago was that they took these incredibly well-rounded designers and then started hacking us up to bits. And those bits became line items. Those line items, they got to charge X number of dollars, and great. The agency made a bunch of money, and the designer died a slow death inside. I think now things are changing, and people are starting to realize that being able to understand someone's primary skill set and how that's complemented by their secondary skill set or tertiary skill set, you begin to see just who that person is and who that designer is as a whole. What that means then is that you get to scale responsibly. And I think this is where things get really important, because this is where I do put my business hat on, which is the best way for us to support any organization at any size is actually to have somebody that can stretch in many different directions, and be able to apply that person and hope that they're mature enough to raise a flag to say, I need help. I actually need a specialist now. And then we'll bring the specialist in to support. That seems to me to be the most responsible one, but it's also a great way to keep designers at your company so they don't fail, because they feel like, wow, well, this person only sees me as a UX designer and I really can do so much more.
Yeah. Yeah. And last time we talked, you mentioned that you were establishing a program, internally there at Siberia to foster that, right? That to continue to foster that growth, to whether it's you want to learn more about a specific topic or really kind of grow just to see maybe even a broader set of topics. You can tell us a little bit about that and how that's been going.
Program is a very formal word for this. I would say I'm going to call it encouragement.
Encouragement.
I'm going to say that what we're trying to do is that I recently hired somebody named Maggie. Hi, Maggie, who came in with, she doesn't have a huge amount of experience, and for the most part she was told that she was one or two things, but when I interviewed Maggie, she said, I really miss doing this. I used to do this when I was in college, and I don't get to do it anymore, and I want to do more of that. So what we started doing now is actually giving her that kind of work to do, and then time boxing it in a certain way in an effort to see and have her explore if in fact this is the way she wants to go. This becomes a little bit more of a mentorship type approach rather than a formalized program. And I do think that it's a nice way to kind of test the waters to see whether or not a person wants to head into that direction, is good at it, wants to get better at it. It's also really good for those of us that are managing them, because then we become better mentors, and it helps us become more clear about our direction.
Yeah, I think within an organization, having people, leadership in particular, see you, encourage your growth, and not have to try and silo you or trying to sort of optimize you, so that you can sort of have a line item sort of note on the bill at the end of the day. Talk about building a culture, building an organization for the long haul, not for these short sort of client focused sort of projects. I think is feels more sustainable, right, in the long run. You end up keeping more talent.
Yeah, you get happy designers, and happy designers, happy work.
Yeah. There's been a larger project that I've been a part of with Adobe Design, which is to find different venues or avenues for designers to participate kind of outside of their day-to-day. So we have a pro bono project. We had an in-studio print lab that we used to run when we were all in the office together, which I'm very sad we're not right now. But and ways in which to give them these creative outlets, right? I think that was such a big part of us building this culture, and growing it and retaining talent and helping them, grow in whatever ways they really wanted to grow, and offer them a little flexibility and, you know, agency, right? Like you don't want to feel like you're just a cog in this machine. Like you want to feel like you play an integral role and that you're valued, and that you know they're just there to support you as you grow as a designer. Yeah.
I feel like somehow we've forgotten why we all became designers and why we got into this business. And it was because we love to create and we like to have fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I have moments where I see us going through the grind constantly, and this isn't just, you know, this is over the last 20 years, and it makes me really sad that like we've lost that playfulness, and I hope that we remind ourselves of that playfulness. And I know it's hard, you know, with everything that we've gone through, particularly in the last 2 years or so, but my hope is that we find that again.
Yeah, yeah. There's a great sort of quote from a writer that I admire, George Saunders, where he really talks about, you know, writing and the advice that he gives to his students, which is to find that joy, right? Joy, not fear, is really his sort of his mantra, right? That yeah, why are we doing this? Are we just doing this to, you know, to meet some KPIs or OKRs, or, you know, meet those numbers and to see the product grow? Like that's good, that's fine, but like, yeah, why are we really doing this? Like, what is the joy that we bring to it? And sometimes, especially in tech, I think that's one of the things that we've had to deal with, which was the impact of the tech business culture on design, and sort of dealing with that and trying to sort of find our way through that, whether it's, you know, just from the joy or sort of enjoyment perspective, or even like an ethics perspective. Like, how do we carve out that space for design to continue to do what they're great at doing?
Yeah.
Sapping all the joy out of it. You know?
Yeah, although I might edit what you just said a little bit, or edit the quote that Saunders just said, and said that there is joy in fear as well. Like, I think that fear of the unknown like drives a lot of us. It's certainly I'll gladly take on something that I've never done before.
Sure. Well, we had a question roll in, so I thought they'd just throw this out there from the audience, from Lisa Fernandez Carlson, who's watching us here on LinkedIn. Sherine, her question is, do you work remotely? And do you think it's important to have group meetings if you have a lot of remote workers?
I do work remotely. Siberia has always been a hybrid company where they've allowed people to work remotely, which is rad. So I think we didn't miss a beat. I think when the pandemic hit, which is great, we were already set up and good to go. In my career of the 20 plus years, 50% of it was working for myself. So that was a lot of remote too. So I'm good there. I think group meetings are important. Although I find it difficult to do that on when people have video fatigue of like being on screen the whole time. It's hard, again, to kind of get people to play around and have that kind of conversation. And again, it's a limitation of the technology. Like, it's difficult for 10 people to talk at once because that mic will only pick up one at a time. And so you can't get people like that same kind of energy that you would have in a room normally. So if you want to do it. Like, if that's the culture you want to build. For Siberia, we do it a couple of different ways. One-on-ones are really important. They certainly are important to me, more important than 2 years ago. We will do those one-on-ones to make sure that everybody's cool. And then it turns out to be like a slightly smaller meetings. So, you know, it's like it could just be for the people that are full-time. Although sometimes we will invite those freelancers in because they're like family. So they'll be part of that as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. To continue on the Siberia line here for a minute. So with Siberia, with the growth that you've seen and you kind of coming on in the last 3 months, what does the team look like? Are you hiring right now, and what are you looking for in hiring talent right now? I know we have a lot of people tuning in who they're maybe just starting their path, and I think it's helpful to know and kind of know the landscape out there and what people are looking for.
Yeah, we're definitely hiring, and we're hiring at all levels. So both at the director level and the lead level, which is great. And the kind of people we're looking for, I hope you're able to grasp that from this conversation that we're having today, is like, I'm looking for generalists and people want to learn new things. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking for people that are willing to try, that are willing to be open-minded, and that are just flat out hungry and want to see what it's like. Because I think that that's the spirit behind Siberia. I think that's always been the spirit for the last 8 years that they captured. And I think that that's very much a part of this culture. And I love that about this company.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's great to hear. So I always like to kind of end our conversations by thinking a little bit about the future, because I've been very invested in that. That's kind of like what my role right now within the team is. But what do you think is on the horizon for design? Whether it's the types of projects we're sort of tackling, or the types of challenges that we'll be facing, or any opportunities that you see out there on the horizon for design.
I mean, I think it's so cliche, but I have to bring it up, the metaverse thing, man. There's just no escaping this, because even if you choose not to participate in it, it's there. And so we're going to have to sort out what to do with it.
Yeah.
And this is where things get really tricky for us, because it is, for those of us that have been working so hard to create integrated experiences for decades, now all of a sudden we have a new thing, I guess, and we have to figure out how to integrate this thing into the ecosystem that currently exists. That makes me excited and angry, and so I'd like to figure out how that works. That being said, I do think, and you only just mentioned the word a few sentences ago, like I do think there's an opportunity there for design ethics as well, though. Like I think a lot of the things that we got wrong currently, and have been trying to right over the last few years, now we have an actual opportunity to get it right out the gate, and I hope that does hold true.
Yeah, I think design is always really well equipped to move into these new spaces. Then they're really about, then what are our incentives to creating in a responsible way, an ethical way within these spaces. If we're just numbers driven, like we have been, you can't fault a designer necessarily for helping their team grow, right? To see those numbers grow. And again, the question is, like, how did you do that though? That's really where the question comes down to. So as we move into these new spaces, we start thinking about it, like, what are the incentives driving design, and in these metaversal spaces, whatever they are, an amorphous sort of definition, but yeah, like designers, thinking very deeply and critically about that. Of course, we might be the best placed to create exciting and new experiences within these new platforms, these new sort of virtual spaces. So yeah, those are really great questions for us to wrestle with. Like,
it's going to take us a while to answer.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
I have hope about a few things. Like I do know that a lot of during the Great Resignation, when a lot of agency people bailed and went to, let's say, more tech companies. I'm excited that they're there, and I hope they get a seat at that metaverse table, and they get an opportunity to help shape up what that is, so that it isn't driven by the same people that created the last little bits, but rather bringing in new perspectives from new people who can help with that. So for all of the people that I used to work with that are there, get that seat at the table and then make it great.
No, great. All right. There's a question from the audience from Bill Mock. Make sure that's a no, not an A. How does the management at Siberia handle the expansion of skills for the design team? And of course, it's the follow-on question: are they committed to the designers' growth as individuals? I mean, I think you've answered that a little bit, but maybe just kind of touch on it again here for Bill.
They are, and I think that's because design and tech, and it's hard for me to separate the two. I think at Siberia, because I very much look at tech as creative partners. So like it's in their DNA. Their founders were designers. It's always been in the DNA of this studio. So there's not a lot of fighting for anything when it comes to design. And in terms of management and do we support the growth of designers, we do. Like as head of design, I have a seat at the table. Ben, who's head of engineering, actually went to design school, so he fully gets it. So it's just so much a part of what we do that's something that I think they very much support.
Yeah. And again, then you spoke to that earlier, the ways in which you encourage designers to try new areas, to learn more, to dabble in those spaces, to help with and you see that as part of the overall growth and the overall trajectory that they're on as a designer. So that's really great to hear. We have another question from Madri K. How can a junior designer like Madri continue to be to maybe be a little bit more of a generalist? Get their feet wet in all these different aspects of design without getting pigeonholed into a specialization? Like, how do they retain that thread, that drive, without maybe as they get into their careers starting to sort of be maybe moved into these sort of specialized, sort of roles, right?
Wow, that is a really good question and a really difficult question to answer. So, what's interesting about the young designers coming out of school, they are generalists pretty much, right? So, like, unless they go get a certification program with some kind of thing, for the most part, they are generalists coming out. But again, something happens to them, and this is what I'm saying, the agencies and tech companies for wanting to just say, well, I just need a UX designer. So, can you quote show me your UX work? And that I think is a bit of a problem there. I think the best thing a young designer can do is to interrogate and interview the directors, like just as much as they're interviewing you on like what their perspective is. Because I think that when you do that, you'll get a feel for whether or not you get an opportunity to do that. The thing is, when you're young, especially when you get to like, let's say that 3-year mark, you do become specialists. It's just one of those things that'll end up happening. But if you look at the director level and you see more generalists there, all of a sudden you see opportunities. So then when you meet, let's say, a leader who supports generalists, and in my case with Maggie says, look, I really want to try this other side of design. There are no barriers to doing that. There's no skin off my back to not like let somebody do something like that. If they want to do it. And that's what she's doing.
Yeah, and I just to sort of add on to what you're saying, which I completely agree with, is that we as designers, of course, are really good at telling stories. So how do you tell our story? Right? How do you tell the story about what we need, right, and who we are, and how yes, we might be coming in to do a UX role, but all these other pursuits influence the work that you do there. Like you can put the UX front and center, but you can also, I think, tell a story that really describes how all these other interests and areas that you are pursuing also impact the work that you're doing on UX. I think again, sometimes maybe we almost do it to ourselves in a way, silo ourselves, turn our own, because again, our motivation is to get a job, which we should be doing. But we can tell a more well-rounded story. I know coming out of school, that was something I was looking to do. And even when I was joining Adobe, I was a very different designer than the people who were already on staff at that company at the time. And luckily, they were looking for that. But I was trying to tell a story about, again, I guess I know I can be great at this job, but it's because I also do all these other things as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think it's key to communicate that. I mean, you can be your worst enemy or your biggest champion, and people are going to tell you what you cannot do. Just ignore them. Just do what you want to do and get in there.
It's so hard, but
it's
solidarity. We have one last question here from Amber G. What advice would you give to those interested in changing careers to design?
Well, it depends where you're coming from. So it's hard to say, but I would like to say that I have a design director. His name is Aaron, and he was an engineer up until a few months ago, I guess. And he came over to be a design director. And I mean, we've scored, right? You've got somebody that understands both sides of the business, plus he understands motion, which is incredible. And so I think, but that was one of those things where Chris Mealy, this decision was made before I got here, so I can take no credit. I will say that Chris Mealy saw this with Ben, the head of engineering, and said, look, this guy really wants to do this, and we support this, because what's the alternative? You see that person leave. So why not give somebody the opportunity? So if you want to make that switch to graphic design, depending on the company that you're with, it's fair to have that conversation. And you'd be amazed at who'd be willing to help you along that way. And if you're young in your career, you may benefit from getting somebody like a mentor. And a mentor does not have to be a formalized program. A mentor can just be hanging out with somebody and being like, hey, can you take a look at my work? I could really use some advice.
Yeah, that's great. I think a great place to end on is really to look for those people who you can learn from, right? Because especially if you're changing careers, as Amber G might be, reach out to those people and see if you can't make some connections. And it might not work every time, and you might have to try a few different people to get someone who's willing to give some time to spend with you. But yeah, there are opportunities to continue to learn, to grow out there. So, well, Sherine, such a pleasure. Again, I'm going to take this inspiration, sort of this creative energy that I felt through our conversation, and this is really going to help me throughout the rest of the day, because I've been solo parenting all week long. So this is really going to help me sort of finish the week strong. So I really appreciate it. And yeah, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute, but what a great conversation. And Talon, I think this will be a time for you to use your design thinking skills. Single parenting, I can think of no better way. But what a great conversation today, Sherine. Thank you for joining us. I loved I love this line in particular when you were talking about, design becoming more strategic in this question of, are we problem solvers, or can we also be problem seekers? And, not just be at the end of the line and, solving a problem with someone else has identified it, but starting to get in that position where it's like we're identifying and seeing the problems even before others do. And I think that's a wonderful way to kind of think about the evolution of this craft and this discipline. I also love the line early on when you said, "A girl's got to eat." Don't we know that? Don't we know that? So
it's true.
Man, big thanks for being here with us, Sherine, and sharing so much kind of candor and insight and talent. Thank you for, as always, an expert job kind of moderating, directing, facilitating this conversation. It's great to see you both, and Talon, we'll see you soon again. So thank you.
Thanks, Sherine. Thanks, Tom.
And for those of you still on, thanks for joining us today. Again, this is the SoDA Series Live. It's a collaboration between the Adobe XD team and SoDA, the Society of Digital Agencies. We do this series monthly. So our next session is scheduled for April, let me check here, April 28th. Same time, noon Eastern Standard. So April 28th, we'll be chatting with Josh Lohman, who is the founder and Chief Creative Officer at Goldfront in San Francisco. So please mark your calendars or check out the Adobe Creative Cloud LinkedIn page. We publish the calendar in the event section. So we'd love to see you guys next month. And until then, big thanks again to Adobe for partnering with us on these, and for Sherine Kazim from Siberia for joining us today. Have a great afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you're calling in from, and we hope to see you soon.